She can hear every wolf's thoughts. The Alpha King is the first one she can't. The forest never truly slept. Its trees whispered in the wind, and shadows moved as if alive. Wolves roamed the dark paths, their eyes glinting like shards of moonlight, always watching, always listening. Among them, Lyria walked quietly, barefoot on the soft earth, her cloak brushing the dew-kissed ferns. She could hear them all. Every growl, every thought, every secret fear of the forest's wolves. Lyria had never known a life outside the woods. From the time she could remember, she had understood the language of the pack, their anger, their playfulness, their longing. It spoke to her like a silent song. People whispered that she was cursed or blessed, depending on whom you asked. She didn't care. Her gift had always been a part of her, guiding her steps, warning her of danger, and sometimes comforting her in the quietest hours of night. Yet even as she moved through the familiar shadows, a cold unease prickled her senses. The wolves were restless. Their thoughts, usually clear and honest, were tangled with fear and agitation. Bah. She paused on a mossy stone, closing her eyes to listen. Something is coming, one wolf thought, trembling. A shadow, larger than any we have known, whispered another. Her stomach tightened. The forest had its own rhythm, a heartbeat she could feel beneath her feet, but tonight it thumped erratically, like a warning drum. Lyria pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her own pulse racing. And then she saw him. Kale, the Alpha King, moved through the mist like a figure carved from shadow. His eyes glowed faintly amber, and the wolves around him fell silent. Not a single thought reached her. Usually, the pack's king broadcasted his mind to every creature in his domain, every whisper bouncing off the trees and into her ears. But him, he was different. Lyria froze. She had heard every wolf, every wild creature, every hidden thought in the forest for as long as she could remember. And yet, before Kale, she felt only nothing. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine, wet earth, and something darker, almost like smoke. Lyria could not read him, and that, more than anything, frightened her. "But you hear them all," he said, his voice low, deep, carrying an echo that seemed to stir the forest itself. "But not me." Lyria swallowed, suddenly aware of her own heartbeat. "Best. I hear the wolves," she said. "I hear their thoughts, their feelings, but—" She hesitated, searching for words. "But yours are silent." Kale's lips curved in a shadow of a smile, but it did not reach his eyes. "That is because you are not meant to." She wanted to step back, to run, but something held her in place. His presence was magnetic, almost painful in its intensity. The rest of the forest seemed to bow before him, the leaves stilling, the mist thickening. Even the wolves, restless moments before, now circled around him calmly, as if obeying some unseen command. Lyria's instincts screamed for her to leave. Most humans would have fled, would have never dared approach a being so powerful. But her curiosity, mingled with a strange, inexplicable pull, kept her rooted to the spot. "What are you?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper.
"I am what the forest fears."
"I am what it obeys," Kale replied. "And you?" He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "You are something the forest has never seen. You are special. Special. Bait." The word echoed strangely in Lyria's mind. She had never been anything but an observer, a listener to the lives around her. Bay. And yet here was someone who saw her not through thoughts but through a weight that pressed on her chest, a force she could not name. "Why are the wolves restless?" she asked, forcing her voice steady. They are afraid of something." Kale's amber eyes softened just slightly, "because the danger is not in the forest, but beyond it. A threat comes, one that touches both wolf and human alike. And he glanced away briefly, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "I cannot let it reach the heart of my kingdom." Lyria understood then that he was a king, not just of the wolves, but of something greater. She could feel the power radiating from him, a silent, relentless authority that demanded obedience. And yet, beneath it all, there was a hint of sorrow, a loneliness she could sense even if she could not hear his thoughts. "I should leave," she said, though she did not move. Breath. "I am not. You will not leave." Kale interrupted, his voice a quiet command. It carried no anger, only certainty. "Not while I'll wish it, not while the wolves need you, and not while I do." Her breath caught. The words held weight, not of desire, but of necessity. A king who bound her to him, and yet a king whose mind she could not touch. "What do you mean?"
she asked, wary. "You will stay at my palace," he said simply.
"Bet you will help me, whether you wish it or not." First, the forest seemed to tense at his words. The wolves circled closer, low growls echoing in the mist. Lyria felt a pull toward them, toward him, and yet a fear she had never known. She had faced wild beasts, storm, even hunger. But this was different. "You cannot command me," she whispered, more to herself than him. Kale tilted his head slightly, and for the first time his expression softened. "I do not command you. I only ask for your cooperation, for your gift. There are things coming that your ears alone cannot hear, and your heart alone may not bear." The air seemed to thrum around her, the trees bending slightly as if listening. Lyria felt the weight of every wolf's gaze on her, yet none were hostile. They seemed expectant, almost reverent. She looked at Kale again, and for the first time wondered if her gift had limits she had never imagined. "What if I refuse?" she asked cautiously. Kale stepped closer, and the mist curled around his boots like living smoke. "Refusal is unwise," he said, and the words were softer than a whisper, yet sharper than a blade. "But it is your choice! I cannot force your mind, only your presence." Her stomach tightened. She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed to flee into the shadows, to escape the pull she felt toward him. But the wolves pressed closer, their thoughts, their emotions, a tangle of fear, loyalty, and expectation that she could not ignore. "You are the first I cannot hear," she said finally, the truth slipping out like a confession. "All my life I have heard the thoughts of wolves. All my life, until you." Kale's amber eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat she thought she might glimpse the answer, the truth hidden behind the silence. But then he looked away, distant, as if carrying a weight too heavy for words. "You will learn. In time," he said quietly. "Bet Some things are not spoken. Some things are not thought. Some things must be felt. The wind rose suddenly, carrying the scent of smoke and rain. The forest shivered around them, and Lyria realized with a jolt that this encounter was only the beginning. She had stepped into a world far larger and darker than she had imagined. And KL, the Alpha King, the first mind she could not hear, stood before her, not as an enemy, not as a friend, but as a force that might change her life forever. Her chest tightened. The forest whispered warnings she could no longer understand, and the wolves circled closer, their eyes glowing in the mist. Lyria knew in that instant that leaving was no longer an option. Her path was now bound to his, whether she wanted it or not. And yet, a single thought lingered, unspoken, unreachable. A thought she could not hear. A thought she could not predict, a thought that made her heart pound in a way the wolves had never done. Something about him was dangerous. Bare. Something about him was necessary, and she did not know which would claim her first. Wraith. The mist thickened, swallowing the forest in silver gray. Kale turned slowly, his cloak swirling around him like living shadow, and vanished deeper into the trees, leaving Lyria alone. Alone with the silence of a king she could not read. Alone with the wolves, alone with the knowledge that her life had changed forever. And yet, as she followed him, as she stepped into the shadow of his world, she could not shake the pull, the magnetic force that called her toward him, toward a destiny she could not yet hear, but that would demand everything she had. The palace rose from the forest like a fortress of shadow and stone, its high towers piercing the mist. The wolves followed silently, their amber eyes gleaming under the moonlight. Obedient, yet watchful, Lyria walked behind them, her steps careful, her heart racing. She had never seen such a place, walls carved with ancient symbols, banners of black and silver, and corridors that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. Kale moved ahead, tall and unyielding, his presence commanding the hall as easily as he commanded the forest. Lyria could feel the weight of his gaze on her, though she could not read his mind. For the first time, the silence between two beings felt heavier than words.
"You will stay here," Kale said, gesturing to a chamber lined with dark wood and windows overlooking the forest.
The wolves are restless. I need you near them.
They trust you even when I cannot.
Always? She asked, hesitant. She had been bound to the forest all her life, but this felt different. This felt like a cage built of stone, shadows, and duty. Kyle's gaze held hers, unwavering. A storm contained behind amber eyes. You are here because you can help, Britt. Because they need you. And because I need you.
The words were simple, yet the way he said them sent shivers down her spine.
She wanted to retreat, to run into the safety of the trees, yet her feet remained planted. Something about KL drew her forward, against her instincts, against the very fear that hummed through her veins. Over the next days, Lyria learned the rhythm of the palace and the king. Kale did not speak unnecessarily, but his presence filled every room, every corridor, every shadow. The wolves moved at his command, their thoughts silent to her as ever, except for rare, fleeting glimpses of confusion or worry. Lyria found herself drawn to the library where ancient scrolls and tomes spoke of wolves, curses, and kingship. She spent hours poring over the writings, trying to understand the force that bound Kale. Many of the texts hinted at an old magic, older than the forest itself, and of an Alpha King whose mind was sealed to protect or punish him. Yet it was not knowledge she craved most. It was him, Bet. She could not read him. She could not feel his thoughts, but every gesture, every slight glance, every motion seemed to pulse with meaning. The way he moved among his pack, the way the forest seemed to shift around him, the way he spoke quietly yet with authority, it all called to her a song she could not name. And Kael noticed her too. At first, it was small things. A fleeting look lingering too long, a hand brushing against hers as he passed in the hall. A subtle shift in tone when he addressed her directly, though his words were calm, controlled. Lyria felt herself responding in ways she did not understand, heart racing, thoughts scattering, every nerve alight. Yet there was also tension. Kael was not a man to be tamed. His power radiated from him like the forest itself, and he carried a loneliness that seemed impossible to breach. She could feel it in the silence between his words, in the stillness of his movements, in the way he watched her when he thought she was not looking. Then the unrest began. The wolves became agitated, their thoughts tangled with fear and warning. Lyria could hear fragments now, faint whispers in the quiet hours of the night. Something was coming. Something that could not be held back by walls or claws, by magic or steel. And Kael seemed aware, though he never spoke of it. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of red and gold, Lyria was summoned to Kael's side. He stood on the balcony overlooking the forest, the wind tugging at his cloak. His amber eyes met hers, unreadable, and the wolves lay around him in perfect silence. "They sense it," he said quietly, almost to himself. "The danger, but they cannot see it clearly." You may be the only one who can guide them, Bess."
Lyria nodded, unsure if he spoke to her or the wind. I
will do my best," she said, her voice soft but determined. She had faced fear before. She had faced storms, beasts, and the weight of the forest's endless watch. But this, standing beside him, feeling the pull of his presence and the storm in the wolves, was different. It stirred something inside her she could not yet name. Kael did not respond. Bounded. Instead, he turned slightly, studying the horizon where the trees met the darkening sky. For a long moment, they stood together in silence, the forest below alive with movement, anticipation, and unspoken tension. Over the following days, the bond between them grew, not in words, but in quiet understanding. Lyria learned to read the wolves' restlessness as reflections of Kael's hidden turmoil. She began leaving food for the smaller packs, guiding them through the forest while keeping the palace safe. And each time she returned, Kael was waiting, silent, watching, always observing yet never revealing the thoughts she so desperately wished to hear. Then came the night of the first attack. The rival clan had chosen the darkest hour, slipping through the misted woods to strike at Kael's territory. Lyria was in the courtyard when the first wolf's growls echoed like thunder. She ran to the edge of the trees, where the enemy's firelight flickered through the darkness. Her heart pounded, her gift flaring with urgency as she called to the wolves. Kael appeared beside her, silent as shadow. The wolves fell into line around him, their movements precise and deadly. Lyria's eyes met his, and for the first time, she felt something inside him stir. Not fear, not anger, not thought, but a spark she could not name. The attack was fierce. The rival clan moved with cunning and malice, but Kael's wolves were relentless, and under his command they fought like the forest itself had come alive. Lyria guided the smaller packs, whispering to them in the language only she could speak, directing them to flank, to protect, to strike. And then in the chaos, it happened. For the first time she heard Kale, not in thoughts, but fragments, like sparks through the silence. Anger, sorrow, determination, bits and pieces that reached her mind in flashes, leaving her breathless, dizzy, and terrified. She stumbled backward, clutching her head as the fragments faded, leaving only questions. What was that? She whispered. Kale's gaze was fixed on the enemy, his expression unreadable, yet something in his stance shifted. Do not linger on it," he said. His voice was calm, measured, yet there was an edge, an emotion she could not yet place. Focus. They are not finished. The wolves obeyed without hesitation, and the attack ended as suddenly as it began. The rival clan retreated into the shadows, leaving only smoke, broken trees, and the lingering echo of their fury. Base. Lyria fell to her knees, exhausted, shaken, and exhilarated all at once. She had glimpsed Kale's mind, even if only for a moment, and it had been like touching the stars. Beautiful, distant, and almost impossible to hold. Bay. Kale approached her, his presence calm yet overwhelming. He extended a hand, and she took it reluctantly. His grip was firm, grounding, yet there was a tension in his fingers that made her pulse quicken. "You are stronger than you know," he said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. "And yet there is more ahead, more than either of us can face alone." Lyria looked at him, and for the first time she saw the weight he carried, the burden of the crown, the curse she did not yet understand, and the loneliness that shadowed every motion. She wanted to speak, to ask, to reach into the mind she still could not fully touch. But the words failed her. And Kale did not need them. He turned toward the palace, his cloak sweeping behind him like a living shadow. The wolves followed, and Lyria, heart heavy with unspoken feelings, trailed behind. Atrine, she felt the pull of his presence, the unbreakable tension between them, and the knowledge that this was only the beginning of something far larger, far darker, and far more beautiful than she could have imagined. Back. As they reached the palace gates, a distant howl cut through the night, long, mournful, and urgent. The wolves stiffened, ears pricked. Lyria's breath caught. Something was coming, something more dangerous than any enemy they had faced.
Kale stopped, his amber eyes scanning the horizon.
For a moment, the silence stretched, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the trees. Then he spoke, his voice low, steady and commanding. "They are coming, and this time we cannot face them alone." She did not fully understand what he meant, but she knew. One thing with certainty: the next step of their journey would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. And as she looked at Kale, the first mind she could not hear, she realized that her gift and her heart would be challenged like never before. The night deepened, and the forest held its breath. The wolves pressed closer, alert, loyal, fierce. And Lyria, standing beside Kale, knew that the bonds of duty, desire, and destiny were tightening around them both. The days after the attack passed in a blur of preparation, vigilance, and quiet tension. Lyria moved through the palace as if walking a thin line between shadow and light. Bed. Every corner, every corridor seemed to hum with unseen danger. And yet, despite the threat, despite the weight of Kale's presence that pressed against her chest, she could not stop thinking about him. The first mind she could not hear, the first being she could not fully touch with her gift, Bay. The fragments of his thoughts she had glimpsed haunted her. Anger, sorrow, determination. Pieces of him, like shards of glass, sharp and beautiful, impossible to hold. She wondered what it would take to reach him, to pierce the silence that surrounded him like a fortress. The Kale, as always, moved through the palace like a shadow that could not be touched. The wolves were calm now, but the unrest lingered beneath the surface, and she could sense it. Round. Something ancient, something old, as the forest itself, was stirring. One evening the palace library seemed unusually quiet. The torches flickered, casting long shadows on the walls lined with old tomes. Lyria sat at a heavy oak table, poring over scrolls that spoke of wolf clans, magical bonds, and kings whose minds were sealed by curses older than memory. She had seen hints before, but now she searched deliberately, trying to understand Kale. Why could no one hear his thoughts? Why did the wolves obey him yet seem troubled when he spoke? Her hands shook slightly as she read. Wrath. The text spoke of the Alpha King, bound by a curse of isolation. Anyone who came close to him, who tried to pierce his mind, would face unbearable pain and heartbreak. It was a punishment placed by a rival sorcerer centuries ago, meant to guard the forest and punish the king for betrayal. The words were clear. The Alpha's mind shall remain untouchable, lest love turns to agony and death. Bay. She realized with a sinking weight that Kale's silence was not natural. It was protection. Bet. And the closer she came to him, the greater the danger, not just to herself, but to him. The next day, Kale called her to the balcony overlooking the forest. Bat. The sun had dipped low, casting long golden shadows across the trees. Lyria's heart raced as she approached. Bay. Kale stood there, tall, his cloak swaying in the wind. The wolves gathered silently around him. "Do you understand now?" he asked, not looking at her, but at the horizon where the trees met the sky. "Some of it," Lyria replied cautiously. I read about the curse, about you, but I don't understand why it exists, why it affects you so strongly." Kyle finally turned, and for a moment Lyria saw something in his eyes that made her heart ache. Not anger, not pride, but a shadow of the sorrow she could almost touch.
It was placed centuries ago,
he said quietly. A punishment for my ancestors, for mistakes I did not make, for sins I did not commit, yet the curse lingers. And it has chosen me as its vessel. Anyone who comes close suffers. Anyone who tries to understand loses themselves.
Lyria swallowed hard.
Her heart beat painfully in her chest. She thought of the fragments she had glimpsed, the anger, the sorrow, the determination. The sparks of his mind she had touched had left a mark she could not erase. And now, knowing the curse existed, she feared for him and for herself.
"I don't care about the danger," she said softly, surprising even herself.
I want to help you.
I want to try. Kale's expression hardened, though the amber warmth of his eyes softened slightly. You should not, he said, voice low and firm. You have a gift, Lyria, a power that is rare and beautiful, but it will not save you from what the curse brings. Beck, you may hear the wolves, but my mind, my soul, it is locked. If you try to open it, you may break. Lyria's gaze did not waver. Then I will break with you. If it is the only way to help you, then I will.
Kyle's mouth pressed into a thin line.
Bye. For a long moment he said nothing. The wind stirred the leaves around them. the wolves shifting, alert yet calm. He seemed to weigh the risk, the burden he would place on her. And then, quietly, he stepped back. Breath.
"You are brave," he said finally. "Foolish, perhaps."
But brave. That may be enough for now. The following days were filled with tension, with moments that tested both of them. Lyria continued to guide the wolves, to read their thoughts, to sense the stirrings of the forest. And each day she felt herself drawn closer to Kale, despite the danger, despite the curse, despite the warning that every bond would bring pain. And Kale, he did not let her close entirely, yet he could not deny the pull either. There were moments when his guard faltered, a touch, a look, a rare spark of warmth, but always the shadows returned, reminding them both of the barrier the curse had built. One night, the threat she had felt since the first attack returned.
A pack of rogue wolves, twisted by dark magic, invaded the outskirts of the forest, moving silently, their thoughts sharp and angry, their presence unnatural. Lyra felt it instantly, a cold pressure in her mind as their snarls and whispers reached her.
She ran to the edge of the trees, her heart pounding. And Kale was already there, standing tall, his eyes glowing amber in the darkness. The rogue wolves attacked with precision, their eyes burning with a strange fire. Lyria guided her pack with skill, her hands trembling but steady. She could hear their fear, their confusion, their rage. And yet, for the first time, she sensed something deeper in Kale. Not thoughts, not words, but an emotion that touched her soul. A storm of sorrow and rage, mingled with something she could not name. The fight was brutal. Wolves clashed, teeth and claws meeting, magic twisting the night air. Lyria moved like a shadow among them, guiding, directing, saving where she could. And in a fleeting moment, she caught a fragment of Kale's mind again. Not words, not thoughts, but pure emotion, pain, regret. A silent plea. She faltered, caught off guard by the intensity. "Kale," she called, her voice breaking through the chaos. He turned toward her, his eyes locking with hers. And in that moment, the curse spoke. Not in words, but in a wave of sorrow that swept through her heart. She felt a cold pressure, as if a shadow had reached into her very soul. She stumbled, gasping, tears pricking her eyes.
"You cannot touch me fully," Kael said quietly, almost painfully. "If you try..."
Best. You will suffer. Lyria gritted her teeth. Bet. I don't care, she whispered.
I will not leave you. Kael's amber gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment, vulnerability touched his face.
But then the wolves scattered, and the rogue pack retreated into the shadows, leaving only silence and the echo of their attack. Lyria fell to her knees, exhausted, trembling from the intensity of the emotions she had felt. Kael approached her slowly, kneeling beside her for the first time, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. You are brave, he said softly. But the curse is older than us, stronger than us. I cannot promise you safety. I cannot promise you happiness. But I cannot even promise that we can survive this. Her heart ached at the words. She wanted to reach for him, to close the distance, to pierce the silence that had held him for so long. But she knew, in that moment, that the curse was a wall she could not scale alone. And then, in the quiet aftermath of the battle, Kael did something he had never done before. He spoke her name, not aloud, but in a thought she could barely hear. A whisper of connection, fragile and fleeting. Her chest tightened. That one fragment, that single stolen moment of intimacy, left her trembling with hope and fear all at once.
The night stretched on, heavy with unspoken words and the lingering danger of what was yet to come.
Lyria sat with her hands in her lap, feeling the weight of the forest, the wolves and the curse pressing on her. She realized with a sharp, painful clarity that her bond with Cale was no longer a choice. It was destiny, and destiny demanded sacrifice, courage, and a heart willing to break. And Cale, the first mind she could not hear, the first soul she could not touch fully, was standing at the center of it all. For the first time, Lyria understood the depth of what she had stepped into. She was not just bound to a king, not just bound to a forest, not just bound to wolves. She was bound to a curse older than memory, older than the mountains, older than time itself. And the closer she came to him, the more the threads of her own heart trembled on the edge of breaking. As the moon rose high over the palace towers, casting silver light on stone and shadow, Lyria looked toward Cale. He stood at the balcony, tall and unyielding, the forest stretching endlessly behind him. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, and in that moment she knew that the greatest challenge was not the enemy in the forest, not the rogue wolves, not even the rival clan waiting beyond the trees. It was him. The curse, and the love that dared to reach across the silence. The forest was alive with tension. The air carried the scent of rain and pine, but beneath it, a heavier, darker presence pulsed. A danger older than any living creature, older than Cale's palace, older than the memory of the wolves themselves. Lyria stood at the edge of the clearing, her cloak brushing the dew-soaked grass. She could feel the stir of the pack beneath her feet, the vibrations of the wolves' hearts echoing her own. Cale stood before her, tall, unyielding, his amber eyes glinting like molten gold in the early morning light. The curse that had shadowed him for centuries was no longer invisible. It pressed against him, seeping through every line of his body, through the air around him, threatening to consume him completely. "They are coming," Cale said quietly, his voice steady yet edged with something unspoken. "The threat beyond the forest, stronger than any enemy. Stronger than any wolf or human alike."
Lyria swallowed, gripping the staff she carried, a gift from the elders of her village.
Her gift, the ability to hear every wolf's thoughts, was not enough to counter what was coming. She realized with a weight that pressed on her chest that this battle would require more than skill or courage.
It would require heart, trust, and a bond that transcended fear. "I'm ready," she said softly, her gaze fixed on him. "We face it together." Kyle's jaw tightened, and for a moment the wall around him, the curse, the centuries of isolation, shivered. He stepped closer, his shadow stretching over her. "This, Lyria, this is not just danger. The curse." His voice broke slightly, the first crack in his armor she had seen.
If you reach too deep, it could destroy you.
"Or me. I don't care," she whispered. "I've already felt the fragments of your mind. I've felt the sorrow, the pain. I felt you. I cannot turn away now." The Alpha King regarded her for a long moment. Then slowly he extended his hand. "Then we face it, together." The wolves circled around them, a living wall of amber eyes and whispered thoughts. But Lyria closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind, not to touch Cale directly, but to feel the rhythm of the forest, the pulse of the pack, the strength of the bond that had grown between them. A shadow moved beyond the trees, larger than any wolf, more twisted than any enemy they had faced. It slithered through the mist, black as night, with eyes that burned like coals. The curse that bound Carl seemed to resonate with it, as if the darkness itself was testing him, reaching for the weaknesses in his soul. Kale moved forward, his presence commanding the wolves, his voice low and steady as he gave orders. "Protect her. Do not let it reach her." Lyria felt the fear and resolve of the pack ripple through her, and she responded, guiding the smaller wolves to flank the enemy. The rogue shadow shifted, striking with speed and precision, but the combined power of Kale, Lyria, and the pack held it at bay. And then it surged toward Kale. A wave of darkness washed over him, a force that sought to pierce the barrier of his mind, to break the centuries of curse that had protected him and imprisoned him at once. "Bay!" Lyria screamed, running forward, and for the first time she reached toward him, not with her ears, not with her gift, but with her heart. Bah. She pressed her hand against his chest, feeling the beat of his heart beneath her palm, steady and strong despite the darkness pressing against him. A shiver passed through her, a pulse of emotion so raw that it left her breathless. She felt fragments of his thoughts again, not words, but memories, sorrow, longing, and love. Kale's amber eyes widened, and for the first time, he faltered. The wolves around him hesitated, sensing the shift, the breaking of the old patterns. "First," Lyria whispered to the pack, guiding them not just with thought, but with determination and heart.
The darkness roared, an ancient, malevolent voice seeking to claim them all.
"Lyria." Kale's voice was barely audible over the storm of the curse. "Do not! I will not leave you!" she interrupted, her voice firm. "We are stronger together." Something shifted then. The fragments she had felt, the sorrow, the pain, the anger, coalesced into something solid, something unbreakable. Lyria focused on the bond, on the rhythm of the wolves, on the trust and courage that had grown between her and Kale. She poured all of herself into that connection, letting it flow into him, into the pack, into the forest itself. The darkness screamed, but the bond held. Kale's hand found hers, gripping tightly, and for the first time their minds brushed, not fully, not in words, but in emotion. Fear, sorrow, longing, and love all surged at once. The curse screamed, resisting, but the combined force of heart and trust was stronger. A blinding light erupted from the clearing, illuminating the forest and scattering the darkness. The shadows twisted, shrieking, then dissipated, retreating beyond the trees where they would no longer threaten the Alpha King or his kingdom. Lyria collapsed to her knees, exhausted, trembling. Kale knelt beside her, his hand still holding hers, amber eyes glinting with emotion. The curse, though ancient and powerful, had been held at bay. And for the first time, Kale had allowed himself to feel, to trust, to let someone in. "Psst. You did it," he said softly, voice unsteady. "You saved me." "Saved us!" "No," Lyra whispered, tears in her eyes. "We did it!" Together. The wolves gathered around them, pressing close, their thoughts calm, their loyalty unwavering. Lyria closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of the pack, the heartbeat of the forest, and the strength of the bond she now shared with Kale. For the first time, the Alpha King's mind felt reachable, not in thoughts, but in trust, in emotion, in connection that could not be broken by centuries-old curses. Kale lifted her gently, pulling her to her feet. For the first time he smiled, not a shadow of one, not a fleeting glimmer, but full and real. The amber warmth of his eyes reflected the rising sun, and Lyria felt a surge of hope and belonging she had never known.
Bear. You are more than I ever imagined, Kyle said quietly. Brave, strong,
Unyielding.
You are!
Bear. Extraordinary. Lyria's heart fluttered, a warmth spreading through her chest. Psst. And you, she whispered. You are not what I feared. You are everything I never knew I needed. For a long moment, they simply stood there, hand in hand, the forest alive around them, the wolves at their feet, the curse that had haunted centuries, held at bay. Thus, silence stretched, not empty, but full of trust, full of love, full of everything that had been denied for too long. And then KL spoke, his voice soft, almost reverent. I can feel you. Finally. Not just your presence, but your heart.
You have reached me, Lyra, where no one else ever could.
Tears pricked her eyes, and she laughed softly, a sound full of relief and wonder. Then, we are no longer bound by fear, she said. No longer prisoners of the curse. Breast. Kale's hand brushed her cheek gently, and for the first time he allowed himself to be vulnerable. No, he said, but we are free. Free together. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of the forest, of rain and earth, of life itself. The wolves howled in unison, a chorus of victory and loyalty, their amber eyes reflecting the first light of morning. Lyria felt it all, the pulse of the forest, the rhythm of the pack, the strength of Kale's heart beside hers. In that moment, the past, with its curses, its loneliness, its fear, fell away. Only the present remained, the bond they had forged, the trust they had built, the love that had grown silently, painfully, and beautifully. Kale lowered his forehead to hers, eyes closing as the moment stretched into eternity.
We have survived, he whispered.
Pert. And now we begin. Lyria rested her hands against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, a rhythm that matched her own. Together, she said. Together, he echoed. And as the sun rose higher, spilling gold across the forest, the palace, and the pack of loyal wolves, a new era began. The Alpha King, who had once been untouchable, silent, and cursed, now stood not alone but with someone who had reached him, who had broken through centuries of isolation, who had brought light into the shadows. The forest whispered its approval, the wolves sang their songs of loyalty, and the bond between Kale and Lyria shone brighter than any curse, any shadow, any danger. They were no longer master and servant, alpha and listener, king and gift. They were equals, united in heart, in soul and destiny, and the forest, ancient and knowing, watched them rise together, a legend in the making, a love that would echo through the trees for generations to come.